Africa has been told what to be, what to trade, and what to believe for generations. Its future has been written by those who view it as a resource mine. Its lands have been plotted by foreigners, and its leaders have been chosen by outside forces. However, a change is occurring. A brand new movement that doesn't seek approval is emerging. A movement without waiting for permission, and Ghana is in the middle of it. Being the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to achieve independence and the cradle of Kwame Nkrumah's vision of an independent, united Africa, Ghana has always been a land of firsts. However, that dream was stolen decades after independence and reduced by economic dependence, foreign influence, and military entanglements that serve interests that extend well beyond Africa's boundaries. Then there was a change, a moment of rebellion. John Mahama gains authority, as a symbol as well as a leader. His triumph is more than just a political event. It is a proclamation that foreign powers will no longer use Ghana as a playground. A pledge that Africa will determine its own destiny. However, Mahama is aware that sovereignty has a price and that words by themselves cannot liberate a country. His first action was a blatant threat to the West that would cause a global uproar. However, what is Ghana doing? Let's investigate. In a bold and unexpected move that has sent shockwaves across international relations, Ghana's President John Mahama has demanded that all US troops leave Ghana. This decisive action comes after Donald Trump's abrupt cancellation of US aid programs and the mass deportation of African immigrants from the United States. Mahama's stance signals a growing tension between the two nations, as he refuses to allow Ghana to be treated with disrespect. His message is clear: Ghana will not be strong-armed into submission, and its sovereignty is non-negotiable. Mahama's recent election triumph is the beginning of it all. On the morning following the election, Ghana awoke to more than a new head of state. A new chapter in history arose when it awoke. There was a lot of celebration in the streets. However, something more profound was taking place behind the applause and flag-waving. This election wasn't your typical one. This was a message to the world and to Africa. Ghana had been engaged in the precarious balancing act between foreign influence and sovereignty for decades. Some leaders promised change, while others upheld the existing quo. However, Mahama's comeback was distinct. The stakes were bigger this time. It was more than just governance this time. Rewriting Ghana's position in the globe was the goal. His triumph was an unmistakable signal. The status quo is trembling. Mahama's return was seen by the West as a geopolitical danger rather than merely a change in politics. Ghana had been a reliable partner in their playbook for many years. A nation prepared to participate diplomatically and accept financial, military, and commercial alliances, all of which had unspoken conditions. However, the world had evolved. Africa was a different continent. In the past, direct colonial rule by foreign powers governed African countries. They adjusted after that, relying on debt, military pacts, and political meddling to hold onto power. Ghana was no different. And yet here was Mahama, a leader who didn't hesitate to resist. Those who profited from Africa's dependence on Western policies, a resource-rich and strategically influential nation determining its own course, saw his return to power as a harbinger of danger. In many respects, this election served as a referendum on Ghana's independence. It served as a test to see if the populace would select a leader who would follow Western norms or one who would take a different approach. The solution seemed obvious. Mahama's victory was not only his own. It was also a victory for an Africa on the rise that defies authority. But why are we discussing his victory? What is the symbol of Mahama's leadership? Policies are only one aspect of leadership. It has to do with perception. Mahama is seen by many in Ghana and around the continent as a representation of an Africa that has finished requesting permission. He serves as a reminder that Ghana's people's rebellious determination, not compromise, earned the country's freedom. His election represents a rejection of paternalism in the West. There should be no more outside influences using Ghana as a test site for democracy. A drive for true economic independence, not only changes that appease foreign investors, but measures that prioritize Ghana. A call for dignity on the international scene. In international affairs, Ghana is no longer a junior partner. It is an independent country with its own priorities. Furthermore, this change is not limited to Ghana. Africa as a whole is observing. Rarely do elections in one nation have an impact outside of its borders. However, this one was unique. Ghana, a country whose democratic procedures impact regional trends, is frequently regarded as a political barometer for the continent. Africa, whose countries have long battled to strike a balance between local government and outside forces, was rocked by Mahama's victory. In recent years, nations in the Sahel, West Africa, and elsewhere have been turning away from foreign rule. Ghana's elections confirmed that this trend was increasing. If Ghana, a nation known for its stability and support for the West, were to elect a leader who supported self-determination, what would prevent others from following suit? It was an obvious message. Leaders who put foreign interests ahead of their own are no longer welcome in Africa. The days of puppet regimes are coming to an end. Sovereignty is being valued over subservience by a new generation of leaders. Ghana had just established the standard. There are victors and losers with every change of power, and Mahama's success greatly upset some. Ghana has long been a vital regional partner for Western countries, a nation they could rely on to back their military and diplomatic plans. However, Mahama's return was ambiguous. Would Ghana still be open to working together on military installations? Would it uphold trade deals that favored foreign nations over citizens? Would Mahama fortify his connections with other African leaders who opposed the West? Analysts and diplomats scrambled due to the uncertainty. Reports on the implications of this for Western interests in Africa were already being prepared by political think tanks in Washington, London, and Brussels. The reality was straightforward. There was no stopping of Ghana's transformation. External influences, economic agreements, foreign aid, and military alliances have influenced Ghana's politics for far too long, benefiting those outside the country more than its citizens. The election of Mahama signifies a restoration to Ghana's actual identity and something more profound. This is the Ghana of Nkrumah, the Ghana that dared to envision an independent Africa and refused to bow. Dreams, however, are only as powerful as the will to pursue them. And the greatest conflicts in Mahama are only getting started, because there are costs associated with questioning the existing quo. Will Mahama's vision come to pass? Or will the old world's forces mount a more formidable defense? The answers will determine the destiny of a continent, not simply Ghana. Let's now discuss the choice Mahama made that caused everyone to discuss him. Nobody anticipated the decision, which shocked everyone from Accra to Washington. John Mahama stood in front of the country and spoke what many had said, but had never dared to say directly. US military personnel would no longer be stationed in Ghana. American forces had been stationed in Ghana for years under the pretense of security cooperation. Mahama had now declared the end of that era. This change wasn't only diplomatic. The post-Cold War framework that had permitted Western nations to utilize Africa as a strategic chessboard was directly challenged. The entire globe was observing. However, what initially drew the US military to Ghana? Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. The US military's official presence in Ghana was a component of a larger security alliance. The mission seemed straightforward on paper. Assist Ghana in developing a modern defense force, responding to regional threats, and combating insurgency. But the truth is much more nuanced. The United States has a long history of integrating itself into foreign forces in order to influence important decision-making processes as well as to offer support. For Ghana, that meant having access to vital military facilities that could further US objectives in West Africa. American military philosophy encompasses more than just warfighting. The goal is to guarantee that allies continue to rely on American military equipment, intelligence, and training. For Ghana, that meant having access to vital military facilities that could further US objectives in West Africa. Arrangements for the sharing of intelligence that put Washington's interests ahead of Ghana's sovereignty. Ghana's defense infrastructure became dependent on outside assistance as a result of an increasing dependence on US military assistance. The larger picture came next. The long-term goal of the Pentagon is to establish a military presence throughout Africa, beginning in the early 2000s. Under the auspices of AFRICOM, the United States Africa Command, the United States has increased the scope of its military activities in Africa. AFRICOM's official mission is to support African forces, counter insurgent threats, and advance stability. However, in reality, it has served as a weapon for military domination, positioning American forces in strategic areas around the continent and guaranteeing that African countries never achieve fully autonomous security capabilities. Ghana had an option, in Mahama's opinion. Either keep following Washington's regulations or take back complete authority over its defense strategies. Mahama believed that who controlled Ghana's destiny was more important than the presence of foreign troops. There were more than just soldiers positioned in military installations when US forces were present. It implied that Ghana was a participant in a wider network of power struggles in geopolitics, one in which foreign interests influenced its national security. And there were actual repercussions. Ghana's independence on areas of regional security was restricted. Regardless of whether it helped Ghana or not, the government was supposed to support US foreign policy. Ghana might have become a target in conflicts other than its own because of the US forces there. The main problem, however, is Ghana's increasing incapacity to decide on its own defense without consulting the West. This was unacceptable to Mahama. He came to the conclusion that Ghana, not Washington, Brussels, or London, should decide Ghana's security. Nearly instantly, panic erupted in Washington after Mahama's revelation. One of the US most reliable allies was suddenly withdrawing from West Africa, where the US had spent years establishing its military dominance. Ghana wasn't the only country involved. This has to do with the cascading effect it might cause. What would prevent other African countries from doing the same if Ghana were to expel US troops? Western leaders rushed to portray Mahama's choice as rash and ill-advised. Analysts said that Ghana was endangering itself, stating that in the absence of US assistance, the nation would be susceptible to economic consequences, instability, and rebellion. There were even those who argued that Mahama was aiding foreign enemies. A blatant attempt to connect his choice to Russia's and China's expanding sway over Africa. Mahama, however, did not waver. Mahama's action was viewed as a daring declaration of African sovereignty rather than a risk throughout the continent. For decades, similar actions have been done by nations like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, which rejected foreign military domination in favor of domestic security measures. Ghana was now a part of the movement. The US was being told to leave by more than one nation. This signaled that Africa will no longer take a backseat role in international military matters. It was a declaration that Africans should be in charge of African security. Partnerships in the military should be fair, not exploitative. There must be an end to the presence of foreign forces in Africa. What follows? As US forces prepare to leave, now, Ghana must figure out how to create a defense system that is truly autonomous. New security measures have already been alluded to by Mahama's administration, including collaborating with countries that respect Ghana's sovereignty, investing in domestic defense infrastructure rather than depending on external assistance, and building regional military alliances within Africa. as opposed to those who consider it a strategic outpost. It won't be an easy journey. Washington will remember this. Western organizations can try to discredit Ghana's economy, spread unfavorable stories in the press, or apply diplomatic pressure to get Mahama to change his ways. However, there is no denying that Ghana has made its decisions. It has opted for independence over meddling, sovereignty over subordination, and a future shaped by Ghanaians for Ghanaians. The issue still stands. Will others follow? The division of Africa was never intended. The colonial powers, who viewed the continent as merely land to be divided and exploited, drew the fictitious borders that currently divide its nations, not the people. As a result, Africa is divided, with nations competing instead of working together, and foreign forces still controlling governments that ought to have been autonomous for a long time. However, a fresh vision is taking shape, one that aims to restore Africa's proper position on the international scene and reverse centuries of separation. John Mahama, the leader of Ghana, is at the center of this movement. His ambition encompasses all of Africa, not just Ghana. An Africa that is self-sufficient, united, and independent of the West in determining its future. In order to do it, Mahama is advocating for African unification, which is brave. For many years, self-reliance has been a dream of Africa's brightest brains. Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, and Kwame Nkrumah were among the leaders who envisioned an Africa that is equal to the rest of the world, controls its resources, and sets its own policies. However, political and economic independence remained a far-off dream despite independence movements sweeping the continent. The cessation of foreign control was never truly achieved. It simply changed shape. Despite gaining flags and anthems, African nations' economies remained dependent on colonial-era currency. Even after they elected presidents and parliaments, international organizations like the World Bank and IMF continued to control their policies. Although they were granted constitutions, foreign military bases guaranteed the continued dominance of Western powers, raising doubts about their actual sovereignty. This is what Mahama perceives it to be. Neocolonialism is being carried on, and he has a straightforward vision. Africa needs to liberate itself. However, how? Unity once more. Pan-Africanism has remained little more than a utopian catchphrase that is rarely implemented, despite being mentioned at summits. That's what Mahama wants to change. Economic independence, resource control, and political and military unity are the three main foundations of his approach. The status quo is directly challenged by each of these actions. Mahama is advocating, for example, that Africa abandon the use of foreign-controlled currencies such as the CFA franc. 14 African countries are still governed by this remnant of French colonial control. In his ideal world, African states would be in command of their own economies through a pan-African monetary system. In order to ensure that African economies are interdependent, he is also supporting the nationalization of important industries to keep earnings in Africa, the construction of local refineries to transform raw materials into high-value goods inside the continent, and the expansion of intra-African trade, instead than depending on the US or Europe. But there are hazards associated with altering the economic system. Numerous African leaders who have attempted to challenge Western economic hegemony have been subjected to economic sabotage, coups, or killings. Thus, the question still stands. Can Mahama's vision be able to withstand the opposition? He is not flinching. A straightforward yet potent belief lies at the core of Mahama's Pan-African vision. Africa ought to be the owner of its riches. For millennia, despite having the most abundant natural resources, Africa is nonetheless among the most economically impoverished continents. The reason is that foreigners have always controlled its resources. Mahama has urged African countries to renounce unfair trade accords that let Western companies take advantage of them for almost nothing in the form of agricultural products, minerals, and oil. while there is minimal advantage to African economies. In order to keep earnings in Africa, he is also advocating for the nationalization of important industries, establishing regional refineries to transform raw resources into high-value goods inside the continent, and boosting intra-African commerce to make sure that African economies are interdependent, instead than depending on the US or Europe. But there are hazards associated with altering the economic system. Numerous African leaders who have attempted to challenge Western economic hegemony have been subjected to economic sabotage, coups, or killings. Thus, the question still stands. Can Mahama's vision be able to withstand the opposition? He is not flinching. African unity is all he needs. Because nothing can surpass Africa if he archives that. We now know one thing. The evolution of Ghana involves more than one country. It is about a whole continent waking up. For many years, Africa has been caught in a vicious cycle of political subservience, economic reliance, and foreign influence. Instead of being a place of power, it has been viewed as a land of resources. Its governments have faced pressure to prioritize the interests of outside parties over those of their citizens. However, that is changing today. Under the leadership of John Mahama, Ghana is sending a message to the globe. The outside world will no longer rule Africa. Ghana is establishing a new benchmark for African sovereignty by opposing foreign military domination. By emphasizing economic independence, it is demonstrating that Africa can prosper without Western approbation. Ghana is starting a movement that is sweeping the continent by promoting Pan-Africanism. This is more than just a concept now. It is taking place. The world is paying attention. However, history has demonstrated that such movements are not without resistance. Remaining in chains is the true threat. Ghana's resolve to regain power is an act of restoration rather than revolt. A return to Africa, as it was always intended to be, a self-governing continent that determines its own course and destiny. Furthermore, that future is no longer just a pipe dream. It is currently taking place. Do you believe that Africa can be stopped? When unity becomes the only thing Africans need most, will Africa band together? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.